Claire used to believe that love was something that never faded, that once two people found each other, everything else would fall into place. For years, she and David had been that kind of couple. Their marriage was calm, steady, and full of small rituals. Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights with popcorn, and handwritten notes left on the fridge. It wasn't dramatic or glamorous, but it felt real. Until, slowly, things began to change. David had always been confident, the kind of man who laughed easily and made everyone around him feel safe. But after an illness that left him weak and thinner than before, something inside him shifted. He began to withdraw from her. The spark in his eyes dimmed. He stopped making jokes, stopped reaching for her hand, and began spending long evenings in silence. At first, Claire thought it was just recovery. She made his favorite meals, planned small getaways, and left encouraging notes on his desk. But David seemed untouched by her efforts. He would smile politely, thank her, then retreat into himself again. The house that once felt full of warmth now echoed with quiet distance. One evening in early autumn, Claire found him standing in front of the mirror in their bedroom. He was shirtless, staring at his reflection with a frown that cut deep into his face. His shoulders looked thinner, his posture heavier. She approached him softly, resting her hand on his back. "David," she said gently, "you're getting stronger every day." He shook his head. "I don't feel that way." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "I look at myself and I just don't see the man I used to be. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Her chest tightened. "Deal with what?" "With me," he whispered. "You deserve someone who can make you feel whole. It's not someone who's struggling with his size, his strength, his stop." She interrupted, tears stinging her eyes. "You're still you, David. That's all that matters." He nodded, but she could tell her words didn't reach him. That night, he turned his back to her in bed, pretending to sleep while she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in their marriage, she felt truly alone, lying next to the man she loved, yet unable to touch the space between them. The following weeks only made things worse. David became quieter. He worked late, avoided conversations, and when he was home, he buried himself in old photo albums, as if trying to remember who he once was. He stopped talking about their future, about plans or dreams. It felt like watching a slow goodbye, one she wasn't ready for. Claire tried to stay patient. She told herself that love required endurance, that if she just held on, things would return to normal. But the silence began to wear her down. She missed his laughter, the warmth in his voice when he used to call her sunshine. Now, he barely looked at her the same way. One Sunday afternoon, she decided to try again. She made his favorite dish, lemon pasta with roasted chicken, and lit candles on the dining table. When he walked in, she smiled and said, "Dinner's ready." He looked surprised, even a little uncomfortable. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, sitting down slowly. "I wanted to," she replied. "We haven't had a proper dinner together in weeks." He nodded but ate in silence. The clinking of forks against plates filled the air. Claire forced small talk, asking about work, but his answers were short. She felt like she was talking to a wall that used to be her husband. When the meal ended, he thanked her softly and went upstairs. A moment later, she heard the shower running and then nothing but the quiet hum of the house. She sat there alone, staring at the flickering candle, realizing how love could still hurt, even without anger or betrayal. The next morning, Claire found a note on the counter in his handwriting. "You're amazing, Claire. I'm sorry I've been distant. I just need time to feel like myself again." It was sweet, but it broke her heart, because time was the one thing she'd already been giving, and it didn't seem to be helping. At work, her coworkers asked if everything was okay at home. She smiled and said yes, pretending everything was fine. But behind that smile was exhaustion, the quiet kind that comes from loving someone who can't see their own worth. Nights were the hardest. David often stayed up late in the living room, scrolling through his phone or watching old sports games. Claire would lie in bed, listening to the soft glow of the TV and wishing he'd come upstairs. Sometimes she'd walk out and find him asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the television still playing. She'd turn it off gently, place a kiss on his forehead, and whisper, "I miss you." But he'd never heard. As weeks turned into months, the space between them grew heavier. Claire tried to remind herself that this wasn't anyone's fault. Illness had changed him physically, but the real damage was invisible. The quiet loss of self-worth that eats away at love. She couldn't fix it with words or affection. She could only hope he'd find his way back. One late night in October, rain drummed softly against the windows. Claire was reading on the couch when David walked in, looking tired and lost. He sat across from her and said, "I don't know how to make you happy anymore." Her heart ached at the honesty in his tone. "You make me happy by being here," she said. He gave a small, sad smile. "But I'm not really here, am I?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence. Then quietly, David said, "I don't want to lose you, Claire. I just don't know how to be the man you married." She set her book down, walked over, and knelt beside him. "Then be the man you are now. That's enough." He looked at her, eyes soft and full of pain. "You really think so?" "I know so." They stayed that way for a while, his hand in hers. No words between them, just the faint hope that maybe love could survive even when confidence couldn't. But as the night grew colder, Claire realized something she'd never admitted to herself before. She was starting to feel invisible in her own marriage. And though she still loved David deeply, a quiet part of her was beginning to wonder if love alone could fill the emptiness growing between them. She didn't know then that this silence, this space of unspoken longing, was what would lead her to a choice she'd never expected to make. It was the beginning of something that would test her heart, her faith, and everything she believed about loyalty and love. And though she couldn't see it yet, that distance, that slow unraveling, was not the end of her story, but the quiet, painful beginning of another. The first time Claire saw Ethan. He was standing on his porch early one Saturday morning, painting the railing in a faded gray t-shirt and worn jeans. He had a relaxed kind of calm about him, the kind that reminded her of simpler times. She had gone out to water her plants, pretending not to notice him at first. But when he looked up and smiled, something about his easy warmth made her smile back without thinking. Ethan had just moved into the house next door, a small 8HS. A small, weathered place that had been empty for months. He was an artist, or so she learned later when he mentioned working from home and teaching painting classes in town. He was around her age, maybe a few years younger, with soft brown eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention at first. Their conversations were short and polite, neighborly greetings about the weather, the neighborhood, the occasional joke about Oregon's endless rain. But as the days passed, those short talks began to stretch longer. Ethan had a way of listening that made her feel heard, something she hadn't felt in a long time. When she spoke, he didn't look at his phone or drift off. He met her eyes, nodded, and really listened. One afternoon, she was struggling with a loose section of the fence that separated their yards. David had promised to fix it weeks ago, but never got around to it. Ethan noticed and came over with a toolkit in hand. "Mind if I help?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "If you don't mind." "I don't," he said simply. And within minutes, he was crouched down, tightening screws, humming softly to himself. Claire watched him work, feeling strangely at ease. When he finished, she offered him lemonade. They sat on her porch steps, drinking in the fading sunlight. Ethan asked about her work, her favorite places to visit, her hobbies. She told him she used to paint years ago, before life got too busy. He grinned. "Then you should start again. You've got that creative spark. I can tell." She laughed softly. "It's been a long time. Then it's overdue," he said with a shrug. "Sometimes you just need someone to remind you what you already love." Those words lingered in her mind long after he left. That night, while David was working late again, Claire sat by the window, looking out at Ethan's house. She could see the faint light from his studio through the blinds, a gentle glow against the dark. It comforted her more than it should have. Days turned into weeks. Claire and Ethan's interactions grew more natural. He started dropping by with small things, a book he thought she'd like, a jar of homemade jam, a sketch he'd done of the neighborhood. They began to share quiet moments that felt harmless, but were heavy with something she couldn't quite name. One afternoon, he asked if she'd like to see his studio. She hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. Inside, the walls were filled with canvases, landscapes, portraits, and abstract splashes of color that felt alive. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "Thanks," he replied. "It's not much, but it's mine." She looked around the room, feeling the pulse of creativity that filled the air. It reminded her of who she used to be, someone who dreamed, who created, who felt deeply. Ethan noticed the emotion in her face. "You miss it, don't you?" She nodded. "I do." He smiled. "Then maybe it's time to stop missing it and start again." That night, Claire pulled out an old box from the closet, her paintbrushes, dried tubes of color, and half-finished sketches. She hadn't touched them in years. She started small, painting in the quiet of the kitchen after dinner while David watched TV in the living room. The strokes felt clumsy at first, but as the colors mixed and spread, she felt something come alive again inside her. When she told Ethan the next morning, he smiled. "See, I told you." "Don't get too proud of yourself," she teased. "I'll try." He laughed. Their friendship deepened in small ways. They exchanged stories, laughed over coffee, and talked about life in ways that felt open and honest. But beneath it all, there was an invisible thread, one neither of them dared to pull. Claire wasn't naive. She knew what she was feeling was dangerous, even if she never acted on it. Yet it was also the first time in months that she felt seen. One late afternoon, Ethan came over to help repaint her porch. David had mentioned it before, but never found the time. The day was warm, the kind that carried a lazy, golden light. Claire sat nearby, handing Ethan the paint cans, their fingers brushing for a second too long. He looked up at her, eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "You're really something, Claire," he said softly. Her breath caught. "Don't," she whispered. "I didn't mean I know," she interrupted quickly, her heart racing. They painted in silence after that, both pretending nothing had happened. But the air between them had changed, heavy, fragile, and charged with something neither could name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood back to look at their work. "You've got a good eye," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe," she replied, forcing a smile. When he packed up to leave, there was a moment of hesitation at the steps. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't want to make things complicated." "You don't owe me anything." She swallowed hard. "You haven't done anything wrong." He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. "Still, I think I've been thinking about you too much." The honesty hit her like a wave. She wanted to tell him to stop, to say it was wrong, but her heart wouldn't let the words out. Instead, she said softly, "Ethan, please." He smiled sadly. "I know. I'll keep my distance." But neither of them truly could. That night, Claire stood at her window again, watching the light from his studio. She felt torn between guilt and a strange sense of comfort. Ethan wasn't a replacement for David. He was a reflection of everything she missed. Connection. Laughter. Understanding. When David came home later, tired and distracted, he kissed her on the forehead and went straight to bed. Claire stayed downstairs, staring at her hands still stained faintly with paint. She realized that the colors she'd been missing weren't just on the canvas. They were in the parts of her heart she had locked away for too long. But as beautiful as that rediscovery felt, also terrified her, because she knew that feelings left unspoken could grow quietly until they demanded to be heard. Ethan was kind, patient, and careful. But even kindness could become temptation when mixed with loneliness. And though Claire told herself it was just friendship, deep down, she already knew the truth. She was standing at the edge of something dangerous. Something she couldn't let happen, but didn't quite know how to stop. It was only a matter of time before the quiet comfort between them turned into a storm neither of them could control. Claire had never imagined that friendship could feel like a storm waiting to break. Days with Ethan had been light, filled with quiet laughter and shared small moments. A cup of coffee on the porch, a painting session, a conversation about books. But beneath it all, There was a tension neither of them dared to name aloud. Every brush of his hand, every shared glance, seemed to linger longer than it should, and Claire couldn't escape the feeling that she was stepping into dangerous territory. It started one afternoon when she went over to Ethan's studio to drop off a book he had lent her. He was standing by a half-finished canvas, paint on his hands and arms, hair sticking to his forehead. He looked up, surprised, and smiled. That smile had a warmth to it that felt like sunlight after months of gray. For a moment, she froze. The way he looked at her, attentive, patient, almost vulnerable, made her heart ache. "Hey," he said softly, "I didn't expect to see you." "I thought I'd return this," she said, handing him the book. Their fingers brushed a fleeting touch, yet it sent an electric pull through her chest. He held her gaze. The studio felt smaller somehow, filled with the hum of unspoken words. "I'm glad you came," he admitted quietly. Claire swallowed hard. She wanted to step back, to remind herself that this wasn't right. But the moment held her in place. "Me too," she whispered. For a while, they didn't speak. She watched him clean his brushes, the motions deliberate, careful, like he was trying not to let the moment slip. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "I've been trying not to feel this pull toward you, Claire, but I can't." Her heart jumped. She wanted to tell him to stop, to pull away, to remind herself of David waiting at home. But her mouth wouldn't move. The truth was, she felt it too. A longing she hadn't realized had been buried beneath months of quiet emptiness. Ethan looked at her, eyes searching for a sign, for any permission. "I shouldn't feel this way," he said. "You're married. I'm your neighbor. I don't want to ruin anything. But I can't pretend I don't care." Claire's throat tightened. "Ethan, you have to understand. I can't." Her words faltered, lost somewhere between her mind and her heart. She wasn't saying yes, not in words. But the way she stayed, the way her gaze didn't leave his, was already an answer in itself. He stepped closer, not pressing, just standing near, letting the silence stretch between them. "I won't cross a line," he promised. "I just needed you to know how I feel." Tears threatened to spill. Her mind screamed with guilt, but her heart ached in a way she hadn't felt in months. With David, she loved deeply, but recently, the love had felt quiet, distant, almost fragile. With Ethan, it was raw, immediate, undeniable. She could feel every heartbeat, every small surge of connection. That night, Claire went home to an empty house. David was away on a work trip, and the quiet in their home pressed against her chest. She sat in the living room, staring at the clock, replaying the afternoon in her mind. She hadn't done anything wrong, not really yet. Guilt gnawed at her. The heart, she realized, could betray you even when your intentions were pure. The following days were a delicate dance. Ethan respected boundaries, keeping their interactions polite. Yet every time they crossed paths, the air crackled with what was left unsaid. Claire began noticing herself smiling more often when he was around, feeling lighter in a way she hadn't in months. But she also felt fear, knowing that the deeper her feelings grew, the more fragile her marriage seemed. One evening, Ethan came over to help finish painting the porch. The sun was low, casting a golden light across the neighborhood. They worked side by side, passing brushes and cans, small touches, accidental, but charged with tension. When he handed her a brush, their fingers lingered for a second too long. Claire felt her heart hammer. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself of the life she had built with David. But instead, she held the brush, letting the moment stretch. "Claire," Ethan said softly, pausing in his work, "I keep thinking about you. I can't stop." Her chest tightened. "Ethan, we can't." "I know," he said, shaking his head. "But I had to tell you. Had to. I can't pretend anymore." She swallowed, looking down at the porch. The paint smudged on her hands, on his hands. She felt a strange mix of guilt and relief, heartbreak and longing. His honesty was beautiful, but dangerous. She wanted to say yes, wanted to surrender to the warmth and attention. But she couldn't. As the evening sky darkened, they cleaned up in silence. The porch looked smooth and bright under the fading light. Claire realized that the physical work of painting had been easier than managing her emotions. She felt exposed, raw, aware of every pulse and heartbeat in a way that frightened her. When Ethan stepped away to leave, he lingered at the steps. "I'll give you space," he said. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just couldn't hold it in any longer." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. Thank you for being honest." He gave a small, sad smile and walked down the path to his house. She watched him disappear into the evening, a mix of relief and sorrow filling her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. Her heart had already been stirred in ways she couldn't ignore. She knew she had to be careful. She couldn't let this friendship become something that would destroy the life she had built with David. But the truth was, every time Ethan was near, the pull between them grew stronger. It was impossible to ignore, and Claire felt it in every nerve, every glance, every accidental touch. Days turned into nights filled with reflection. She thought about the man she loved, David, who had been her partner for years, who had grown weaker and uncertain, who needed her support. She also thought about Ethan, whose presence reminded her of passion, connection, and attention. Her heart felt torn in two directions, one bound by loyalty, the other by desire. One evening, found herself painting quietly on the porch, inspired by her own emotions. The colors were bold, expressive, almost chaotic, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. Ethan passed by, stopped for a moment, and watched her work. He said nothing, just smiled softly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Claire knew that moment, simple as it was, would stay with her forever. It was proof of the complexity of human emotion, of the fragile line between friendship and something more. And though she wanted to turn away, to suppress the longing, she also couldn't deny that a part of her heart had already been claimed. The days ahead promised uncertainty. Claire knew that every choice she made could ripple into heartbreak, regret, or revelation. But for now, she simply sat on the porch, brushes in hand, heart pounding, and allowed herself to feel, truly feel something she had thought lost forever. And in that quiet, charged moment, she understood the truth. Sometimes, the heart cannot be tamed. It feels first, thinks later, and leaves you standing on the edge of choices you never imagined you would face. It was a delicate, dangerous, and beautiful beginning, one that would test everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the human heart. Claire had spent weeks in a quiet storm of emotion. The porch, freshly painted, had become a place where she could feel alive again. Yet every brush stroke reminded her of boundaries she couldn't cross. Ethan had retreated after their confessions, keeping his distance. But the tension between them lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. She told herself it was for the best, that she needed to focus on David, the man she had married, the man who was quietly struggling with his own insecurities. David's return from his latest work trip was always a mix of relief and apprehension. She loved seeing him walk through the door, tired but smiling. Yet she also felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing on her chest. The house felt fuller when he was home, but it also reminded her of how fragile their connection had become. He tried, of course, to engage, to laugh, to be present. But the gap that had formed over months of self-doubt and withdrawal remained. One evening, they sat on the couch together after dinner. David looked exhausted, rubbing his temples. Claire noticed the lines of worry etched across his face, the way his shoulders seemed to slump under the weight of invisible burdens. She wanted to reach out, to tell him he was enough, but she couldn't find the right words. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly, trying to sound casual. He sighed. "I'm just trying to get back to who I was. I feel like I'm failing sometimes, Claire. I'm not the man I used to be." Her heart ached. "You are the man I married," she said. "Nothing has changed that." He shook his head. "I know, but it's more than that. I can feel it. I'm smaller, somehow less confident. And I hate that you see it." Claire reached for his hand. "David, I don't care about that. I love you. That's all that matters." He looked at her, eyes searching hers, filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering doubt. "Then why does it feel like you're slipping away? Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth about the longing, about Ethan, about the ache of feeling unseen, but she couldn't. She didn't want to hurt him. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently. "I'm here, David, I promise." The days continued like this, a delicate dance of emotion. David tried harder, making small gestures to reconnect. He cooked dinner one night, brought home flowers another, even left a handwritten note on the counter saying, "I'm still trying. Please be patient with me." Claire smiled at these signs, her heart warming, but she also felt the lingering pull toward Ethan, the part of her that had been awakened by attention, understanding, and quiet connection. One Saturday, David suggested they take a walk along the nearby river trail. The air was crisp, tinged with the smell of pine and damp earth. As they walked, David spoke softly about his fears, about how he worried he couldn't live up to her expectations, about how he felt like he had lost something essential in himself. Claire listened, holding his hand, squeezing gently to let him know he wasn't alone. "You know," she said finally, "I don't expect perfection. I don't want the man you were. I want the man you are now." He stopped and looked at her, eyes wide with surprise. "You really mean that?" "I do," she said, smiling softly. "You're enough, David. Always have been." For the first time in months, he relaxed, leaning into her embrace. They walked in silence after that, letting the sounds of nature fill the space where words often failed. Claire felt a warmth returning to her chest, a quiet hope that perhaps their connection could be mended. That love could survive even when confidence faltered. But life, as she had learned, was rarely so simple. That evening, Ethan appeared at the gate, holding a small sketchbook. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him, not after their last tense conversation. He smiled politely, almost shyly. "I wanted to show you something," he said, holding out the sketchbook. "Just a few drawings I did inspired by the neighborhood. No pressure to look." She took the book, flipping through the pages quickly. The sketches were delicate, full of detail and emotion. She felt a rush of admiration and a pang of guilt. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "Thanks," he replied, his voice low. I just wanted you to see them." He lingered for a moment, then nodded and left, waving goodbye. Claire closed the gate, her hands trembling slightly. The encounter reminded her that her heart still carried a quiet pull toward him, even as she tried to focus on David. That night, David came home, tired but smiling. He noticed her distracted look and reached out. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." He nodded, trusting her words, unaware of the emotional tug-of-war inside her. Claire lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling torn between love, loyalty, and longing. She realized that love wasn't just about presence or gestures. It was about understanding, about being seen and valued in ways that went beyond words. Over the next weeks, David began to regain some confidence. He started cooking again, talking about small projects at home, and even planning a weekend getaway. Claire felt relief and joy at his efforts. She wanted to celebrate the return of the man she had loved for so many years. Yet the memory of Ethan's honesty, the intensity of his gaze, the way he had made her feel alive, lingered in the corners of her mind. She knew it was dangerous to dwell on it, that it could unravel the fragile threads she was trying to mend with David. But she also couldn't ignore the part of her heart that had been awakened, a reminder that human emotion was complicated, messy, and often uncontrollable. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, the sun dipping low over the trees, David took her hand and held it firmly. "Claire," he said, his voice steady, "I know I've been distant, and I know I've made you feel alone. But I'm here now. I want to be better. I want us to be strong again." Tears filled her eyes. "David, you are enough," she whispered. "I've been scared, but I know we can get through this." He smiled, relief and vulnerability mingling in his expression. He leaned closer, resting his forehead against hers. "I don't want to lose you," he murmured. "You won't," she replied softly, feeling the weight of her heart shift. She realized that love wasn't about perfection or absence of struggle. It was about staying, about fighting for each other even when fear, insecurity, and temptation loomed. Ethan never returned after that. The porch remained as a silent memory of the pole that had almost led her astray, a reminder of how fragile and human love could be. Claire continued painting, not just on canvas, but in life, learning to mix patience with passion, understanding with loyalty. She often thought about the lessons of the past months, that love could endure struggle, that hearts could falter yet still remain committed, and that true connection required honesty, patience, and courage. David's struggle with his confidence, his sense of size in the world, had tested her love, but it had also strengthened it. She learned that love was not about avoiding difficulty. It was about facing it together, holding on even when the future seemed uncertain. In the end, Claire realized that human hearts were resilient, capable of deep affection even in the midst of fear. She and David were not perfect, but their bond was real, grounded in understanding, forgiveness, and shared commitment. The years ahead promised challenges, but Claire felt ready to face them with him, knowing that the quiet, steady love they nurtured could survive storms, temptation, and uncertainty. And in that realization, she felt peace, a gentle, lasting peace that came not from ease or absence of struggle,
Right.
but from the enduring choice to stay, to love, and to believe in each other.